Hello and heartily welcome to today's video. Our topic for this week is sugar and exercising, or sugar and sports. And yeah, I'm glad that you're here with me. My name is Dominika Hanschk, so let's get started. Sugar plays a pretty important role in our life, right? And not so long time ago, we actually expected to have like a carb loading party before having a major important event in your sporting career. So people would actually load up on carbs the day before they were to expect to prove that they're the number one in running or in exercising their particular kind of sports. So athletes would actually consume a high amount of carbs, some carb loading, so that they could perform the next day brilliantly. But is that still the recommendation that we see today? Actually, there were some kind of athletes, and they were the ultramarathon runners, that have actually shown us that this is not the ideal situation or not the ideal kind of food to consume or to train for that brilliant performance on that day. So what happened? Well, ultramarathon is obviously a lot longer than the typical 42 kilometers. So they are running for more than 100 kilometers. They have to perform they have to have a performance for a very, very long time. And what happens is there is a specific time during the running where some people just can't perform any longer. It's like for them hitting a wall where they can't get any energy out of their body anymore to keep running. And when people actually looked at what happened at that moment in time, they realized that this has to do with their glycogen reserves in their body. So at that moment in time, when the athlete is no longer able to activate any glycogen because the reserves in the muscle and in the liver tissue are gone, and they can't quite switch properly to using fat as a substitute to continue performing, to continue running, and therefore they are just unable to continue the race and they have to give up. So there were some ultramarathon runners that did it obviously different. And what they did is they actually looked at the whole situation in how you can perform during your sports, or which kind of fuel you could use to actually do your exercise. And they basically said, well, I could use carbs for exercising, or I could use fat. And the body obviously uses something of both, yeah. So it uses carbs, but it's also using fatty acids. And depending of how I train my body, it's using one or the other more. Okay. So with people or with athletes eating a lot of carbs, obviously the body is trained using carbs during exercise and during races. Okay. On the other hand, people or athletes consuming less carbs and actually focusing on protein and fatty acids, they are actually using a lot more fatty acids during their exercise regime, during their race. And therefore, their body can use also during a race more fatty acids, and therefore they have a different kind of performance. And what we have seen is that ultramarathon runners who are actually doing the whole thing low carb perform a lot better, not necessarily because they're faster, but because they have a more consistent ability in just keeping going and basically crossing the finishing line. So scientists actually looked at those athletes and tried to understand what's the difference, what's behind that fact. And they found out that these runners obviously use their metabolism in a different way. they burn a lot more fatty acids during the same kind of like exercise, and because of that their body can adapt more easily at those long distances and just keep going for hours on end until they cross the finishing line. So one would think that every human being has the same kind of like carb resources in his body, but it's not like that. Scientists actually realize that people eating lots of carbs have a much higher resource of glycogen. Glycogen is basically the method of saving carbs in our body. They have a much higher pool of glycogen than people eating low carb or ketogenic. Okay? And where is this glycogen saved? Well, it's basically in the muscle tissue and in the liver tissue. Why? Well, the muscle is that kind of tissue that needs quick energy. So if we have to outrun the tiger, then we need instant energy, and basically glycogen delivers that instant energy so that our muscles can perform and we can run away, we can get away. Okay? The other thing where we need glycogen is basically in the liver. Why is that? Well, glycogen or carbs come during the day with our food. And we have then spikes of our blood sugar, and the blood sugar is also going down again, and then we're eating again. The blood sugar has to be in a constant band, yeah? And our brain is regulating that. So during night, we are not eating. So what happens there? When we don't eat, our body is still using the blood sugar for energy. So something has to happen so that that blood sugar is keeping between those two limits. And our liver is doing that because it's releasing the glycogen over the night so that we have a constant blood sugar level, and therefore we can keep alive during the night and we can regenerate. So glycogen is a very important thing. And what I find is that I can actually see with my fasting people what it's like actually getting rid of glycogen reserves. Why is that? Well, when you're fasting, you're not eating any food, right? So the typical Buchinger fast is just fluids, so water, tea, yeah, and you have no food. So there is no carbohydrates coming from the outside lifting up the blood sugar level. And therefore, the body is taking the glycogen reserves to basically keep going. Because in the beginning, to tell the truth, the body is just expecting, well, oh, we're not eating for one day, but we'll probably find something soon. But it's not that case during fasting. So the body has to actually use the glycogen reserves to keep going. And then you can see the people splitting up in two kind of groups. There's this one group which is used to eating low carb or ketogenic or doing intermittent fasting. So the body is used to using fatty acids in times where there are no carbs around, and so the body can provide energy to all the functions of the metabolism. But there's also this other group which heavily relies on carbs. Okay, so they're eating a lot of carbs during the day, and yes, during night there's no food, so the body is using the glycogen reserves to actually look after the blood sugar levels. But before the reserves are gone, somebody is eating carbs again, so they get refilled very quickly and they don't have any problems. But when they're fasting, then the problems will come, because glycogen reserves last about 24 hours. So after 24 hours, we see who's eating lots of carbs and who's not. Those people who are eating lots of carbs, they have an energy problem. So they feel down. They are not very energetic. They just want to sleep and just sit and just take it easy. And maybe they have a headache and so on. The body is kind of in the process of suggesting, oh, I'm sick, right? And, we have this process. Our brain actually tells our body to not do much when we are sick. It basically tells the body, come on, don't produce much energy, feel lethargic, just get to bed, rest and regenerate. And the same thing happens during fasting. So our body is in the process of providing or of trying to get the right enzymes ready for the fatty acid metabolism. But because that takes time, it's basically slowing you down, making you feel tired and not very energetic, so that I can actually have the time to produce those enzymes. But somebody who's regularly doing intermittent fasting or who's regularly eating low carb, that's no problem, because the body is switching easily between those two kinds of metabolisms, and therefore all the enzymes needed are there, and they just thrive during fasting. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant whether you're fasting or not eating for 16 hours or 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours. It just doesn't matter. And it's similar when people are actually exercising. Usually doing those kind of like long duration exercises, people used to low carb, to intermittent fasting, can perform at a constant rate far longer than people used to carbs. Okay? So there you have it. There is a difference, and the ultramarathon runners have shown us that it's a huge difference that you can have. And so scientists actually showed as well that nutrition, or the right kind of nutrition, and sports for athletes has actually changed. Yeah, if you compare the way athletes eat from nowadays, just 5 or maybe 10 years ago, it's completely different. So take, for example, your national team, your national football team, and compare your current team to the team 10 or 15 years ago. Just watch an episode on video on YouTube and compare the two. It's such a huge difference, because 10, 15 years ago, everybody just said, oh, eat carbs, 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 that's important. You have lots of quick energy, that's it. But today, those athletes and even those football athletes have to do a lot more. They have to, they have to have endurance. They have to be flexible in a completely different way. And also the nutrition has changed completely. So what's good nutrition for athletes? Well, lots of green vegetables, obviously, salads, fruits. And with fruits, they are sometimes even careful that they say, well, prefer berries, for example, rather than the more sweet fruits like bananas or grapes. Yeah, so they actually focus on lots of greens, beans, for example. Yeah, healthy fatty acids, healthy protein sources. And that's a healthy diet for athletes nowadays, to consistently actually put the effort in and have a good outcome, win the race. Well, I hope this was interesting for you today, and I've shown you a bit how sugar actually influences your way of performing during exercise. And maybe you want to try this out. Yeah, maybe try out changing your diet before or during exercise, or just in general, and see what impact that has on your exercise performance, how you perform in the gym or how you perform on the track, whether you feel any different. I would love to hear from you in the comments. So I read all of them and I will answer any questions. I'm looking forward to that, actually. Next week, we are still talking about sugar, but then the topic will be how sugar interacts with our brain, whether there are any aspects that are quite important to actually describe how we think, how we feel and behave. And I'm looking forward when you're here with me next week as well. So, see you next week. Bye bye.